Chapter 231 Kicks. Weeks after Neil's proposal at the amusement park, the news was still the hot topic of every entertainment show and magazine. Everyone was still talking about it, like it had just happened yesterday. It was still shown on television, and the amusement park had even used the video of the proposal for their ads, with Neil's approval. The spot where Neil had proposed had now turned into a destination for couples, with their pictures on every wall. In the first week of the engagement, Mia hadn't had a moment of rest without her phone ringing. She turned down dozens of invitations to talk shows, and only attended one with Neil, where they were asked questions and played games about love. They were questioned about when the wedding would be, but thankfully, she and Neil had already decided to sign the wedding certificate, and then have the ceremony after she'd given birth. They'd recently signed the certificate, and now she was his wife by law. The first week had been so stressful that Mia had been having a few complications with her pregnancy. She went through intense stomach aches at times, the pain so severe that she'd end up crying and curled up on the bed. She spent 3 days at the hospital the first time it happened, but the scariest part of it all was that the doctors said her pregnancy was fine, and the stomach pain must be due to stress. Despite being on bed rest for almost another week, she still experienced the pain occasionally. Neil had brought his work home just so he could stay with her whenever she experienced the pain. He'd give her the recommended pain reliever from the doctor, and hugged her through it until it subsided. He'd gotten many expert doctors from different countries to check on her, and they all said the same thing. Some even said it would stop after she gave birth. Every time Mia woke up at night to find Neil working in their room with weary eyes heavy with dark circles, she felt guilty. He rarely slept, always tending to her during the day and working at night. She didn't know what was causing this pain, but she wished it would go away so she could be a good wife to him. She went shopping for a wedding gown with Rain yesterday just so she could prove to him how fine she was, and despite telling Neil that he could go to work or even take a nap at home, he still insisted on going with them. Recalling how he'd insisted on carrying her after a little walk around the mall, and how he was sweating so hard from it because she'd gained weight, a small smile graced her face. She knew her body shape had changed and that she'd added more weight, but Neil would never agree to her complaints because he still believed she was the most beautiful woman on earth. Though for a woman pregnant with twins, a lot of people said her body looked perfect and in shape. But to her, she hated looking in the mirror to see the changes in her body, but Neil didn't mind one bit about the change. He still showered with her and held her to sleep every night, just like when she was still only 3 months pregnant. "You're awake," came Neil's voice, breaking her out of her thoughts. He took off his reading glasses and closed the documents he was going through. "Did I wake you, sweetheart?" he asked, standing up from his desk. Mia sat up on the bed as Neil walked toward her, a soft smile on her face. She shook her head gently. "No, you didn't wake me. I just wanted a glass of water." Neil nodded, walking around the bed to get her a glass. He watched her closely as she drank it, then took the glass from her and set it on the nightstand. He tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear with a tender touch. "Are you still having the pain in your stomach?" he asked softly, his voice filled with love and concern. He knew the pain was the only reason she woke up at night, which was why he'd chosen to work at night so he'd be awake whenever she woke up, as he'd noticed that she liked to endure it alone and not wake him. Mia shook her head. "No, not since last week. Maybe the doctors are right. Maybe it'll stop the closer I get to having the babies. I'll be 7 months pregnant in 4 days." She took a breath to continue speaking, but gasped and held the side of her stomach. Neil's eyes widened in panic as he rushed to her side. "Is it the pain again?" he asked, already reaching for the pain reliever on the nightstand. Mia grabbed his sleeve and laughed softly. "No, it's not the pain. Your children seem to like hearing your voice. One of them just kicked my ribs. They always seem to kick when you talk." They discovered a few months ago, when Mia went for an ultrasound, that she was carrying 2 boys, and Neil could never forget the shock he'd got from the news and when he'd heard their heartbeat. They'd had a small party at home to celebrate, but because of her condition, they'd not made it grand and only invited a few close friends. Neil's expression relaxed upon hearing it wasn't the pain, a smile spreading across his face. He settled himself beside her on the bed, placing his hands on her bulging belly. "If I had known we'd have 2 stubborn boys our first time, I wouldn't have gotten you pregnant so soon. Maybe I would have avoided it back at the mountains. Then you wouldn't be going through all this on our first few months of marriage." Despite his words, his eyes were filled with love as he stroked her belly. But he suddenly jerked his hand back when the baby kicked again. Cursing under his breath, he leaned down and said, "You two better stop kicking my wife if you don't want me to do the same to you when you're out. If you want to fight, wait until you're out of there. Don't injure my angel." As if in response, the baby kicked again, and Neil laughed in amusement and wonder. Mia watched him with a smile, her heart swelling with love. He moved down and laid his head on her lap, his ear close to her belly. Looking up at her, he asked, "Do you really think they can hear us?" Mia nodded. "I think so. They've become more responsive since the day you played the guitar for me and sang my favorite song." She thought back to that evening, the way Neil's voice had filled the room, the baby's kicks seeming to dance in time with the melody. It was as if they were already connecting with their father, drawn to his love and presence even from within her womb. She'd been unable to sleep that night, and he'd wanted to help her relax, surprising her by picking up her guitar and playing her favorite song. Recalling the night now, Mia looked down at her husband, who was fascinated by their children hearing his voice and kicking. He pressed his ear against her belly, as if wanting to hear their movements again, and smiled boyishly when he felt their tiny kicks. Reaching out for her phone beside her, she angled it down and snapped his photo to capture the moment for keepsake. The picture captured his boyish smile and his fascinated gray eyes. She took 3 more before putting the phone aside and stroking his hair. "I never thought how amazing it is to listen to their movements in your womb," Neil said, his voice filled with wonder. "You women are incredible. The way you can bring life into this world is beyond anything I could ever imagine. Thank you, Mia, for this gift. For carrying our children and for being so strong." He yawned. "I might end up falling asleep hearing their movements. I'd better go back to my work and let you sleep." Neil was about to get up, but Mia pushed his head back onto her lap. It was already 2:20 a.m. and she'd had enough sleep, while he hadn't. "I'm not sleepy. You can sleep for a while, Neil. You've been awake all night." She stroked his hair and watched as he fought with his heavy eyelids, trying to stop them from closing. "I dare not sleep while you're awake, you." "Hush," she pressed her finger against his lips. "Don't fight it. Go to sleep, darling." With his eyes closed, he asked, "Are you sure you aren't in any pain?" "Yes, I'm not in pain. I'll let you know if I am. Now go to sleep." He turned his head on her lap and kissed her belly before he let himself fall into slumber, with Mia stroking his hair. Mia watched with a smile as his features softened in sleep, and his chest rose and fell slowly. She traced her finger under his dark circles and hoped he'd get the sleep he deserved before the sun rose. He'd been more worried and stressed about her condition than she was, and his research on the internet wasn't helping. She told him to stop searching about her pain, as the results did nothing but add to his panic, but he wouldn't listen. There were times she feared he'd fall sick from how much he stressed. If he wasn't calling some doctors abroad, he would be searching for the reasons behind her pain on his computer. His efforts and hard work made her feel loved, and she couldn't have asked for anything else as long as Neil was with her. Chapter 232 My Love. Mia hadn't felt any discomfort for a week now, and she was glad about it because Neil had finally gone back to working at his office. Her days had been less chaotic without nurses running around their house to assist her, and more importantly, she could move around the house and do whatever she wanted without Neil's constant worry. Today, since she felt bored at home, she decided to personally cook dinner for Neil tonight. It had been a long time since she had last cooked him a meal. The last time was when they first signed their marriage certificate, and her husband had seemed to enjoy the food more than anything. But then, was there anything in this world Neil didn't enjoy as long as it came from her? He always seemed overly pleased with anything she gave him or made for him. Just like the cufflinks and tie she'd gifted him months ago, which he'd worn for a straight 2 weeks because it was a gift from her. He had refused to wear any other ones, and when she'd pointed it out, he'd said it was because it felt more comfortable and better than all the dozens he had lying in the closet. There was also another night when she'd placed salmon on his plate. Instead of telling her he was allergic to it and pushing it away, her husband had gone ahead and eaten it like it was the best thing in the world. If they hadn't been sharing a room, she wouldn't have known how much it affected him. His face had swollen up, his throat had been blocked, and he couldn't breathe. Mia had been scared to death when she found him searching through his things for an antidote after her night shower. She'd rushed up to him and caught him when he was about to fall from lack of breath. Thank goodness the antidote had been in his hand when he collapsed, or she wouldn't have known what was wrong with him. Mia had never felt so much fear in her entire life. When his breath returned to normal after the antidote, she'd never felt such relief that it almost made her legs go numb. She'd stayed awake all night to monitor him, and when he'd gotten better and explained to her, she'd sworn never to have anything with salmon in her house again. Remembering that day now, Mia smiled while whisking a bowl of mixed flour. Her heart warmed by the memory that had seemed to terrify her then, but made her smile now. Neil could be such a character at times, and the fact that his temper had seemed to improve after their marriage only made her love him more. Not once had he raised his voice at her or let his temper get the best of him when they had an argument. Even when she was going through one of her mood swings and got angry at him for no reason, he'd always calm her down with a gift or his lovely words. The only time after their marriage Neil had seemed to get angry in her presence was when someone sent her a large gift box 2 days after signing their marriage contract. He wasn't angry because the person had sent a gift to her, but because of the contents inside the box that had terrified her and almost caused a sudden miscarriage. Recalling that day now, a shudder ran through her body. She had woken up feeling good that morning, but the housekeeper brought in a large, ribboned gift box. The box looked so harmless that Mia had been curious to know what was inside and who had sent it, as there was no card attached to it or a sender's name. She eagerly unwrapped the box without waiting for Neil to finish taking his morning shower. Mia had expected to find a frame of her and Neil or some wedding gift, as she had received many during that time from strangers and close friends. However, what she found inside the box had knocked the breath out of her lungs and made her almost faint, thanks to Neil, who rushed to hold her when he noticed her pale face. Inside the cute, harmless box was a large doll with Mia's picture glued to its face. But that wasn't the scary part. What terrified her was the blood dripping from the doll's open stomach. The doll had been wearing a dress similar to the one she wore to Neil's banquet and had been cut open in the stomach with a small note that read, "Enjoy it as much as you want now," stuck to the pool of blood. The blood had looked so real, and after a few investigations, they realized it was animal blood. Neil had been so angry when they couldn't find the sender. He scolded Mia after she recovered from the shock and warned her never to accept any more gifts or open any in his absence. He unleashed his anger on his men who couldn't find out who had sent the box, but he held himself back from letting his anger get the best of him with Mia. Since then, Neil had become so paranoid and wary that he wouldn't let Mia leave the house alone, for fear that someone was out to get her. However, Mia believed otherwise. She'd taken it as a cruel prank from someone who wanted to instill fear in her. Recalling how Neil always checked their cars before going out for anything that might be harmful, Mia smiled faintly. The housekeeper, tidying nearby, noticed Mia's faint smile and asked, "Miss Mia, you're smiling a lot today. Are you that excited to cook dinner yourself?" Mia chuckled softly. "I'm smiling because of some memories. Don't mind me, I'm just happy to finally be cooking for my husband after such a long time. Please pass me that towel." The housekeeper passed her the towel with a smile. Normally, the madam of the house rarely engaged with the staff, and at first, she'd thought Mia would be the same. But that had changed one morning when Mia had asked all the maids to join her at the dining table, saying it was boring to eat alone since Neil had left early for work. Since then, the housekeeper had come to like Mia, who treated her more like an aunt than a helper. As Mia opened the pot, steam billowed out, and she almost burned herself in the process, but the housekeeper rushed to her side. "Miss Mia, please sit down for a while. Let me take over. You've been doing everything by yourself the whole time." "No," Mia said, shaking her head. "I want to do everything with my own hands. You can go do something else, Emily." Hours later, after they had finished cooking, Mia showered and grabbed her phone to call Neil to check on when he'd be home so she could set the table for them. In the Galvera Enterprise, Neil was in the middle of an evening meeting when his phone rang. He usually put his phone on airplane mode during meetings, but lately, given his wife's condition, he'd stopped doing so in case of an emergency call from home. Furthermore, since Mia's incoming call had a special ringtone, he recognized it was her calling even before he looked at the caller ID. Without any hesitation, he picked it up immediately, surprising everyone in the room, who had been instructed by him to keep their phones off during meetings. But Neil was the CEO. Who would dare tell him what to do? "Hey, sweetheart," Neil greeted, his voice soft and affectionate as he stood up from his chair and walked towards the glass wall in the conference room to get privacy. The board members watched in astonishment as their ever-so-cold CEO spoke with an expression and tone they had never seen before. Though they all knew about his marriage and his wife's pregnancy, as he never failed to mention it at any given opportunity, He'd openly bragged about his wife carrying twins and flaunted it as if they didn't have families of their own. Whenever he bragged, he did it with a cold, aloof demeanor that made them believe he was just doing it for show. But now, witnessing this firsthand, they saw a different side of him. "I'm sorry, Carita. I have some important things to attend to here at work. I won't be able to come home early." "No, don't stress yourself by coming here," he said into the phone, then listened for a moment to something she was saying before replying, "I know you are strong enough, but I wouldn't want to stress you into driving here to have dinner with me." He listened again, then laughed, a sound so foreign that the board members exchanged amazed looks. "Are the babies kicking you again? Give my love to them, and I love you too. Don't forget to take your medication after dinner." Neil seemed reluctant to end the call. "I love you more. Go to bed early, okay? And I'm serious, don't stress yourself by coming all the way here," he said, knowing how stubborn she could be when she wanted to do something. The closer she got to giving birth, the more worried he became about her leaving the house without him, especially after they'd received that gift box, and now that he was starting to ruin Rodrigo Enterprise and bring the man down. The last thing he wanted was for Rodrigo, who had not yet attempted to fight back, to strike by doing something to his wife to get to him. He had placed many bodyguards around the house to protect Mia from anyone who might want to harm her. Even Owen Sullivan, whose company had gone bankrupt a few months ago and who had done nothing to revive it, might want to get back at Neil in some way for what he had done. Neil didn't care if they faced him, but harming his wife would be something he wouldn't be able to take. Never. He hadn't let her leave the house alone without him for months after the gift box incident, and he surely wouldn't let her leave now to come to his office alone. It wasn't a long distance from their house, but that didn't mean he'd be at peace until she arrived. His love for her grew with each passing day, and the more he loved her, the more he feared any harm coming to her. This was why he was working late to finalize some deals that would get Rodrigo out of the picture completely, just like Owen Sullivan. "Mia, I'm serious as hell. Don't leave the house," he warned again when she responded with one of her throaty sounds, which she did when not taking him seriously. She did it again, and he laughed. "You like playing with me, don't you, my love? If you listen to me, I'll get you a dozen of those chocolates you love on my way back home." When he was finally sure she'd listened, he ended the call. And his expression turned back to his usual aloof demeanor as he returned to his seat. He turned to the presenter. "Continue," he ordered, his tone firm. The board members exchanged glances, still processing the transformation they had witnessed. Their ever so cold, controlling CEO had shown a side of himself they never knew existed. They'd never seen him so warm and human before. Mrs. Galvera must mean the world to him, and they couldn't help but think that whoever dared to cross her would be courting death. Back at the house, Mia put on her coat and asked the housekeeper to place the food she prepared in the warmer because she planned to take it to Neil's office. She hadn't intended to listen to him when he told her not to come. Besides, she wanted a bit of fresh air that only a drive out of the estate could give her. She hadn't been out in a while. It was only 8:20 p.m. If she could get Zephyr to drive her to Galvera Enterprise, then Neil wouldn't have to worry about her being alone. She'd noticed that he'd become more paranoid about her going out without him, as if he feared there was something out to get her. She'd listened to him for too long. She needed to go out a bit. A short drive from the house to his office wouldn't harm anyone, Mia decided as she walked out to find Zephyr, who she knew was somewhere on the premises, probably lurking in the shadows like some ghost. She walked outside and called out his name twice. She wasn't surprised when she suddenly saw his tall silhouette approaching her from behind. But she jumped when he said, "You called, ma'am?" from above her. Zephyr never failed to scare the soul out of her with his sudden appearances, she thought as she turned to meet his emotionless face. He wore his usual black suit that seemed to blend into the night, his soulless hazel eyes boring down at her patiently. "Yes, I did. I want you to drive me to Galvera Enterprise. I want to—" "No," he cut her off before she could finish. "I was ordered by the boss to make sure you stay at home," he informed her with his detached voice and soulless eyes. "Aren't I also your boss?" She frowned up at him. "Yes, you are, but I only answer to Xavier," he replied indifferently. "Well, I've called Xavier, and he gave me permission to bring dinner to his office as long as you drive me there. See," she gestured to the basket one of the maids held containing the food. "I need to take this to him. If you don't believe me, I can call him and tell him how you refused to listen to me." "Do you want that?" His emotionless hazel eyes finally wavered at the thought of being told on. No matter how cold and aloof the man was, Mia realized, he didn't want to offend Neil in any way. She watched as he cleared his throat and took the basket from the housemaid, who was looking at him dreamily, but he paid no mind to her and said to Mia, "I will go get the car ready and put this inside." Then he left. Mia smiled in satisfaction, knowing she'd won. But would she still feel the same way 40 minutes from now? Chapter 233 Attacked Unexpectedly. 20 minutes later, as Mia sat in the back seat of the sleek Aston Martin, she gazed out at the night view of the city as the car moved through the streets of Mirage Mesa. Her window was down, and the cool breeze and the beautiful, shimmering nightlife of the city made her feel like sleeping. The lights of the city shimmered like 1,000 stars, and as she watched, she subconsciously stroked her large belly with a smile on her face. She knew Neil would be mad that she had gone against his words and come to meet him, but she needed this night drive to clear her mind of many thoughts that had been bothering her. Besides, whenever he said he'd be back late, he always ended up returning at dawn when she would be fast asleep. If she were certain that he'd eat something while working, she wouldn't have insisted on bringing him his dinner. However, her husband had a habit of neglecting his mealtimes for work or anything else. She ought to negotiate with him that if he wanted her to stop worrying and going against his words, he should start paying more attention to his eating habits. Sometimes she wondered how he could still have such a fit body when he didn't eat properly. Turning back to the windshield, Mia caught sight of Zephyr's cold, hazel eyes in the rearview mirror. She'd seen how loyal the man was to her husband, and out of curiosity, she called his name. "Zephyr," he hummed in response, his eyes never leaving the road. "How did you come to know Neil?" Mia asked. Zephyr fell silent, his eyes slightly softening in the mirror. Just when Mia thought he wouldn't reply, he spoke curtly, in the military. He focused back on his driving, clearly unwilling to elaborate. Although Mia wasn't satisfied with his brief answer, she pursed her lips and decided not to ask him any more questions, recognizing that he was the kind to avoid conversations. She couldn't help but think that a man with his face and aura should be swarmed by women, but any woman who valued her life would know to stay away from him. Mia's thoughts were abruptly cut short when the car screeched to a stop, the tires making a loud, ear-piercing sound. She heard Zephyr curse under his breath as he reached for something in the front compartment. Just as she was about to ask him what was happening, she noticed him pull out a gun. Her breath caught in her lungs as she saw through the window that they were surrounded by 4 black cars with bulky men exiting, all armed. "Stay in the car and do not come out, no matter what, ma'am," Zephyr instructed, his tone colder than usual. Before Mia could question him, he stepped out of the car and locked her inside. She watched in horror as a fight and shooting broke out. Slamming her palm over her mouth, she was forced to watch Zephyr fight with the strange men who seemed to want to reach her car. When they began to gang up on him and hit him from every angle, Mia tried to open the door, but it had been locked. With shaky fingers, she reached into her purse for her phone, intending to call Neil, but she heard a loud bang and saw Zephyr fall to his knees. He was shot. Mia felt her heart drop to her stomach. Despite being shot, Zephyr continued fighting to keep the men away from the car until someone whacked him on the head with a gun, then began to drag his unconscious body into one of their cars. "Oh no, Zephyr!" Mia quickly retrieved her phone to call Neil, but the phone slipped out of her grip because of her shaky fingers. She cried out in frustration as bending in her condition was a challenge, but she willed herself to stop shaking and do something as she knew the men would be coming for her next. Her body was trembling to the extent that a panicked scream escaped her lips when she saw one of the men reach out to open the car door. When he flung the door open and reached out to pull her out, she used her purse to hit his hands. "Let go of me," and then tried to run out through the other door, but another man had already opened the door before her, and before she knew it, something was pressed against her nose. Her limbs weakened instantly. Before she slipped into unconsciousness, she heard one of the men say, "Tell boss we've got her." The darkness closed in around her, leaving only fear and uncertainty in its wake. Neil's perspective. Neil knew how much effort Mia had put into cooking for him and how much he loved her cooking. Determined to show his appreciation, he made sure to leave his office by 11 p.m. instead of staying until dawn as he usually did. On his way home, he stopped at a chocolate and cookies shop, just like he had promised Mia, and bought several dozens of her favorite chocolates. As he was placing the chocolate packages inside his car, a sudden surge of unease knotted his heart and twisted his stomach. He paused, pressing his hand to his chest, feeling his heartbeat accelerate. The uneasiness was so intense it scared him. Scared for what? He didn't know. Slowly closing the car's back door, he sat in the driver's seat and decided to call Mia. When her number was unreachable, the uneasiness increased to the point where he could barely breathe properly. He'd never felt this way before for no reason. Without wasting time, Neil stepped on the gas and drove home straight to see if everything was all right. When he got home, he didn't even wait to bring out the chocolate packages. He ran straight into the house, desperate to see his wife first and make sure she was all right. The moment he entered the house and was about to walk up the stairs, the housekeeper craned her neck, her eyes widening when she saw he came in alone. "What about Miss Mia? Didn't you come back with her?" Neil stopped in his tracks, his heart making a sickening throb. "Where is my wife?" he demanded, his voice tight with panic. The housekeeper looked confused and concerned. "Miss Mia went out 3 hours ago to take dinner to your office along with Zephyr. Didn't she come to you?" Neil's world seemed to crumble around him. His stomach clenched, and his heart felt like it might stop. "She didn't come to me," he said, his voice a whisper filled with dread. "She'd been gone for 3 hours when the drive to his company was just 40 minutes from home." Something wasn't right. The housekeeper gasped, her worry mirrored in her eyes. Oh no, what could have happened? Neil's mind raced, thoughts of Mia's safety overwhelming him. Something must have happened, he said, urgency propelling him forward. He ran back out, his heart pounding, and grabbed his phone. Calling Zephyr's number repeatedly yielded no results, which only heightened his fear. Neil felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead as he couldn't reach the bodyguard. He'd warned him not to let Mia out of the house. He told her to stay at home. Something bad must not happen to his wife, nothing must happen to his love, or else. The housekeeper watched him from the entrance, her hands clasped together in distress. She had never seen Neil so frantic, so vulnerable, as he paced around making calls and yelling on the phone to whoever he was talking to. "I need you to track Zephyr's car immediately. My wife is with him, and they're not responding. Hurry up, damn it, she's pregnant and in no condition to go through any stress. I need them tracked in 5 minutes." When he ended the call and was about to get into his car, the housekeeper approached him quickly. "Should I call the police?" she asked hesitantly. Neil stopped for only a minute to say, "Not yet. I need to understand what's happening. Zephyr is trained to handle situations like this. If he's not answering, it means something serious has happened." His mind flashed through possible scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. He'd feared a situation like this for months now after that box was delivered to them. He'd known their enemies would attack, and once they did, it wouldn't be him they'd get to, but someone more important to him than anything in this world. He tried to avoid such a thing, and he hoped as hell nothing like any of the things he was thinking had happened to her. He hoped that their car had just run out of gas or had broken down somewhere, and not that something bad had happened. But he knew deep down that that couldn't be the case. He could feel it in his heart that something had happened to his Mia. The uneasiness he'd felt earlier must have something to do with her. She was in trouble, and he couldn't reach her. With those thoughts, Neil felt a fear like never before, a fear that twisted his stomach and made him sick and shaky. He felt a tight knot in his heart that left him gripping the door of his car to steady himself and stop the throbbing in his head and heart. He needed to find her now or he'd go insane. His wife ought to be safe. She had to be, please. Don't let anything happen to her, not Mia. He chanted silently. Without another word to the housekeeper, he got into his car and left the house at a flashing speed. On his way, he got a message that the car Zephyr had driven had been tracked. With a sickening fear, he drove straight to the location. Chapter 234. She was taken. Neil's heart raced as he drove to the location where Zephyr's car had been tracked. The fear and worry gnawed at him, twisting his stomach into knots. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned ashy. He couldn't shake the ominous feeling that something terrible had happened to Mia, and he didn't want to believe his instinct that she'd been taken, or even worse, had happened. He was willing to let go of everything he had, everything but his wife. She had come to mean the world to him, and he couldn't imagine a day without her in it, a single minute without hearing her voice and her laughter, a single second without thinking about her at home. Oh Lord, please don't let anything happen to her. Let her be there when he'd arrive at the location. Let her be waiting for him with that bewitching smile of hers and her angelic presence. Let her be. His thoughts trailed off immediately upon arriving at the location and seeing his men already there, including Liam, who had been informed by James. Neil parked haphazardly and jumped out of his car, his movements swift and urgent. He saw them crouching near a car, examining the ground. Without thinking, he ran towards them to see what they were looking at. As he approached, his heart plummeted into his stomach when he realized they were looking at traces of blood on the pavement. Neil prayed the blood didn't belong to Mia. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him at the thought that she'd been injured, but he forced himself to stay focused. "What happened here?" he demanded in a low, controlled voice that made all the men standing there turn to him at the same time, as if they'd just noticed his presence, so focused were they on taking samples of the blood. "Where is my wife?" he asked, fighting to keep his frantic emotions in check. He could feel a ringing in his head that made it seem like it would explode if he were given bad news. The men hesitated, sensing he was in no condition to take any bad news, but they dared not pretend not to hear his question. One of them spoke up without meeting Neil's eyes. "We think she's been kidnapped," he informed. "From the tire tracks on the pavement, it seems they were overtaken." There were a few shots fired, as indicated by the bullet holes in the side of the car. The man trailed off as Neil abruptly turned back to the car behind him, half walking, half running towards it. Neil's eyes scanned the scene, desperate for any sign that would lead him to her. When he reached the car, he noticed the doors were left open with no one inside, but Mia's purse and her phone were lying on the floor of the car. He quickly picked up the phone and noticed his contact displayed when he unlocked it. His throat burned and his stomach constricted as he swallowed repeatedly to stop the sickening feeling in his gut at the thought that she'd wanted to contact him before she was taken. She was taken. What he'd feared so badly had happened. What he'd tried to prevent. His eyes caught a small piece of paper lying on the back seat with one line written on it as he tried to reach for her purse. With shaky hands, Neil quickly picked up the note instead. It read, "Too late." The curt words made his blood run cold. Too late for what? He didn't want to think about what they meant, but the implications were clear and terrifying. His fingers tightened around the note, and his fear quickly morphed into rage. Pure, unadulterated rage that made his blood boil in his veins and made him see nothing but red. Neil's expression turned murderous as he understood the situation. He was going to kill whoever dared to take Mia. He'd make sure the person regretted poking him. Liam, who noticed Neil staring murderously at something, approached him from behind, peering over his shoulder to see the note. "What does it mean?" Liam asked, confusion and concern etched on his face. He'd been woken up by James about the news of Mia, and knowing how much his friend loved her and how much he, himself, had come to care for her and looked forward to welcoming his godchildren into the world in 2 months, he'd rushed to the scene in his pajamas. Neil's voice was low and dangerous as he spoke through gritted teeth. "I don't give a fuck what it means. All I know is I will get my wife back. I don't care if the whole goddamn city has to be turned upside down. I want my wife returned to me unharmed." He crushed the note in his palm, his fury almost overwhelming every man standing in the scene. They all felt the chills of his rage in their bones and the doom that was about to fall on Mirage Mesa if Mia Galvera wasn't found. He turned to one of the soldiers standing nearby. "Summon the other soldiers from the military," he ordered, his voice cold and commanding. "Something of mine has been taken, and it must be returned." Mia's perspective. Everything was dark and damp at first. She couldn't see anything beyond the darkness that consumed her and the throbbing of her skull. Her limbs felt sore and detached in a few places. She couldn't make out her surroundings, but she was certain she was in a moving vehicle. She tried to squeeze her heavy eyelids open when she felt the vehicle jolt to a stop, but it was futile. She was too weak and exhausted to even try. She wanted to sleep, but her instincts told her it wasn't the time to sleep. She was in danger, and she knew it. She had to do something, but what? Mia groaned as she tried to move her hand, but the pain and the tightness of her wrists made it impossible. She experimentally tried again and realized her wrists were bound together with something so hard and coarse that it bit into her skin with every little movement she made. She forced her eyes open and realized she couldn't see beyond the sack on her head. She moved her legs as well and felt the coarseness binding her legs together pinch her skin. As realization dawned on her, she began to panic and opened her mouth to scream, but to her dismay, her mouth had been gagged with duct tape. She made muffled cries and tried to move, but it was futile. Nothing she did helped her. It only made her discomfort even worse. Mia stiffened when she suddenly heard the sound of the door opening. She stopped making sounds as she felt several presences around her. Before she could react again, someone had roughly pulled her legs and then lifted her off the rough floor of the vehicle. She tried to struggle out of the person's hold, knowing they were obviously her kidnappers. But her struggling and muffled cries made the men around her laugh out loud. "Shut that hole in the middle of your face, bitch," said the man carrying her in a bridal style to who knows where. "You're lucky our boss wants you unharmed, or else I'd have beaten the shit out of you and dragged your heavy ass all the way inside rather than carry you. If you know what's best for you, stop struggling, or I won't hesitate to drop you." Mia stiffened immediately at that threat. Not because she was afraid of him, but because she feared for her children. If he were to drop her with force and she fell on her stomach, she would not only get hurt, but the 2 living beings in her womb would get hurt as well. Thus, she remained as quiet as a rat in the presence of a cat and allowed him to carry her to wherever they were going. Mia could see nothing but could only hear the sounds around her. From the echoing footsteps, she could tell there were several men following the man carrying her, and from the doors they kept passing and opening, she knew the place they were taking her was not small. She didn't allow herself to panic about the fact that she'd been kidnapped and was vulnerable to armed men. She didn't allow herself to think about how Neil would be worried if he couldn't find her. She blanked her mind and only tried to process and listen to the noise around her. "Have you called the boss?" she heard one of the men ask. "Yes, the boss is on the way here," replied another. Mia couldn't help but wonder who this boss was. Why would they take her? As she was pondering that question, she was roughly disposed on a hard floor where she felt the men begin to tug at the coarse ropes around her limbs. She grimaced when the sack was yanked off her head, but instead of seeing her surroundings, she was met with thick smoke that made her eyes sting and made her cough. Then the smoke began to clear. However, her senses went away with it, and before she knew it, everything was dark again. Chapter 235 The Agreement. In a lavish room, the single lamplight on the wall cast a soft, golden glow over the expensive furnishings. Owen sat casually in an armchair, a phone held to his ear. His expression was one of satisfaction as he listened to the person on the other end. "Good," he said, his voice smooth and confident. "I'll be there when she wakes up next." He ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket, turning his attention to the woman sitting opposite him. The woman had light brown hair that framed her face, a face that was a mirror image of Mia's, however with sharper eyes that made her seem like an enchanting fox, and dark red lips that gave her a fierce and dark aura. Usually, she wore a mask, but in Owen's presence, there was no need for such pretenses as they were now accomplices. Her elegant legs were crossed, and her demeanor was one of calm composure. "Mia has been taken to the place," Owen informed her, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth as he saw the satisfaction laced in her brown eyes. He couldn't help but be affected by the sight of her. Her angelic face brought back memories of all the times he'd spent with Mia in Whispering Way, all the times she was still his fiancée. Sometimes he almost forgot this woman wasn't Mia until she spoke. Mariana's lips curved into a smile, revealing a deep dimple on her cheek. She tapped her long fingers against the glass of wine in her hand, her eyes never leaving Owen. When she spoke, her voice was identical to Mia's, yet it lacked the warmth and sweetness, instead carrying a detached, almost blank quality. "That's good news. But I hope that now that she's in our custody, you won't try to outsmart me after our agreement," she said, her tone as emotionless as her gaze. Owen was reminded again that this woman wasn't his Mia. Those emotionless eyes and detached voice always brought him back to reality and fueled his desire to get his own woman back. He averted his gaze. He couldn't stand to see such a look in the eyes of a face similar to Mia. He'd loved Mia because of her sweetness and generosity. She fit with him so well that he would be willing to do anything to make her his again. However, he was willing to do anything but stick with the agreement he'd made with her twin. Did this Mariana think him a fool? He was no fool. In fact, he had no intention of working with her if it weren't for the fact that he liked the idea of playing with Wayner's head. Their agreement had been simple and plain. Mariana wanted Neil, while he wanted Mia. Thus, they'd agreed to take Mia away and keep her until she'd given birth in their custody. Then Mariana would have the baby and return to Neil as Mia, while he'd have Mia and do the same thing her real mother had done to her 20 years ago, make her forget and then take her far away from Neil Wayner. It was as simple as that. But Owen wasn't a fool. He wasn't born a fool and he would never become one now. After everything Neil had made him go through over the past few months, the bastard had not just ruined his company but also his underworld business with Rodrigo. He'd taken away everything Owen had worked his ass off to get in just 3 months. He'd made him a laughingstock in the country, and his fame and business were all gone, all thanks to Neil Wayner. He'd be damned if he stuck to some fucking agreement of not involving Neil in the kidnapping and letting the son of a bitch be. Mariana had made him agree not to play any mind games with Neil with the kidnapping or blackmail him into doing everything Owen wanted, but he wasn't an idiot. He'd use this opportunity to make Wayner regret ever crossing him. Mariana, who noticed the calculative look in Owen's eyes, frowned. She regarded him suspiciously, then raised a brow. "I hope that long silence of yours is not a sign that you don't want to stick with our agreement," she said. "I'd hate to have to kill my sister if you go back on your word. Xavier is all I want, but if I have to wipe Mia out of the picture to get him, I won't hesitate. You know me so well, Owen, and I hope you act wisely." She took a sip of her wine, her eyes never leaving Owen. Indeed, Owen thought disgustedly, he knew her so well, which was why he wanted to make sure she wouldn't see his plan coming when he struck Wayner. Mariana had been raised by underworld men. She'd grown up seeing death and witnessing the most terrifying things. If not for her stupid feelings for Wayner, Owen would have believed she had no heart at all. She was skilled in making all sorts of weapons and knew how to use every single one of them. He'd watched her fight off men twice her size without breaking a sweat. She was a female version of her father, cold, heartless, and emotionless. She rarely smiled, and he'd learned that she was a big bully in every school she went to. She could kill without blinking an eye. The reason he wasn't rebelling against their plans was that he feared she'd harm or even kill Mia, just as she'd said. Her connections in the underworld went deeper than his, and he dared not let her know that he had no plans of sticking with the plan. Cursing under his breath, he gritted out his response. "I have no plans of going against our agreement, so relax. So I can stab you in the back, bitch," he thought silently. He hated the fact that she acted like she was the boss of him. Women were created to be below men. Their place was in the kitchen and bearing children, not to take charge of a man's business like this little bitch was doing to him. Mariana smiled, but it never reached her eyes. "Good. Remember, you must not contact Xavier until the day she gives birth. I heard he's turning the entire city upside down to look for his wife. He even took his soldiers and barged into my father's hospital room to accuse him of taking Mia last night." But Kelvin laughed in his face when he couldn't find any evidence of his involvement. "Let him continue his search and don't interfere," she said with a faint smile on her face as she imagined the day she'd live in his house as his wife. She could still remember those bewitching gray eyes of his that had looked at her with so much love 20 years ago. It had rained in Mirage Mesa that evening when she stepped out to go after her father's car to remind him of the pony he promised to buy her. She'd run out of their estate gate, calling for him to stop, but ended up falling into a puddle and ruining her favorite pink dress. She'd been crying and wiping the dirty mud off her dress when a boy ran towards her and gave her a hand while scolding her not to run next time. Mariana had never known there was a boy like him in their neighborhood, and she'd never met him until that day. He used his handkerchief to wipe her face. "Why were you running after that car?" Neil said as he tried to get the mud off her face and clothes. "You shouldn't run after cars. It's not safe for little girls like you. Now be a good girl and come with me so I can help you look clean again." He pulled her little hands and guided her towards the Galvera estate. Mariana had been so mesmerized by the boy that she didn't care he was taking her to a house she'd never entered before. She could imagine her mother scolding her for going into a stranger's house, but she didn't care at that time and followed him wherever he was taking her. He'd taken her to his mother, who had welcomed her like she knew her before, gave her a change of clothes, and cookies to eat while her dirty clothes dried. "Xavier, is she the girl I heard you talking to the housekeeper about yesterday?" Catherine, his mother, had teased him, and Xavier had blushed and glared at his mother to shut up and not embarrass him. From their exchange, Mariana had realized that Xavier had perhaps seen her somewhere and had taken an interest in her. She'd liked him instantly from then and made sure to go to his house to play all the time. He'd even given her the nickname Mimi and taught her how to play the guitar. She'd been the one he liked in their childhood. He'd never even met her twin sister back then, but now she'd taken her place as his wife. Though Mariana had been sent to the States after she graduated high school, she had never forgotten about the boy who'd made her know the true meaning of love. She'd looked forward to the day she'd return to Mirage Mesa and look for him again, but her father had not allowed her nor given her the choice of returning when she pleased. She'd been stuck there learning how to make weapons and deliver them to his underworld men. She'd been trained in several ways and had been taught to kill her emotions. She'd killed every emotion in her, but her heart had remained reserved for only one man, Xavier. And now she was back to claim him from her backstabbing sister. Remembering all the things she'd had to endure because of Mia and their childhood, her fingers tightened around her wine glass until it shook and spilled on her. Mia, a girl who had no name before and the sister she had once cared about, had been the reason she'd lost everything. If it weren't for Mia, their mother would still be alive right now, and perhaps Mariana wouldn't have been hardened by their father like she was now. Looking down at the scar on the back of her hand that had been caused by Mia, Mariana felt her hatred burn deeper than anything. She'd make sure Mia paid for everything, and what greater punishment was there than to take away her child after she gave birth and claim them as hers? That would be a more satisfying punishment than death. She'd have Xavier and his child.